I know. So this is our first ever What's Going On with Adventures. And we're starting a few minutes early because I wasn't sure what would happen when we push the button. Because this is the first time I've ever done it through Zoom. So I'm pretty jazzed about this. Um, but yeah, welcome to our first ever What's Going On with Outgrow Your Garage. Today we are talking to John McMahon, who is the CEO of the Associated Landscaping Contractors of Colorado. And I'm pretty excited about this. I have known John for several years, ever since I also was running a landscaping company. And he's been with the ALCC longer than I've been in landscaping, which is delightful. And so, yeah, so he'll tell us a little bit about what's up with the ALCC and how he got involved. And we're going to talk about how it is running a statewide organization in a state as large as Colorado, particularly where most people live on the Front Range. But as a statewide organization, you have all kinds of people, and a little bit about how they think about legislative priorities and new initiatives and all kinds of exciting things about landscaping. So, John, you can give yourself a little introduction.
Well, sure. Well, thank you for having me on this morning, Jesse. And yeah, for those that don't know me, I'm John McMahon with the Associated Landscape Contractors. We're a trade organization, as Jesse said, a statewide organization. So a lot of the things, while there is heavy concentration in the Front Range, there are many things that affect the entire state. Um, it's kind of backing up a little bit how I got into ALCC. It's interesting enough. I actually came from the Western Slope, was raised in Aspen as a kid and high schooler, and even in college was a landscaper in that valley. So I had a lot of familiarity with it. But I actually started in hospitality and tourism and was with Vail Resorts for a number of years as their corporate marketing director. Later, ran tourism in Carmel, California, actually Monterey, Pebble Beach, and then was a deputy director at state parks in California. So it gave me more exposure to landscapes and public places. So that was where I transferred, coming from private industry and being part of things like Ralston Purina and Coca-Cola and many of those entities into the public sector. And so, that's where my background started to kind of pivot a little bit into policy, into running organizations that were the champion of cause, whether it be tourism, hotels. And eventually, all of that work in California brought me right back to Colorado. And as part of the state tourism effort here and in California. Um, and then was running the National Ski Areas Association after I was the head of the Chamber of Commerce in Breckenridge. And as I was running the National Ski Patrol, I became more familiar with ALCC because we shared some of the same issues, strangely enough. And one of them was workforce. And in particular was H2B and our seasonal employees that, Colorado is the highest user of per capita of the H2B program, which we heavily depend on because of the seasonality. And that was
So,
my
for
first
anybody
introduction.
who isn't in seasonal work, which most people aren't, what is the H2B program? Just
Sure. The
like,
H2B, the short of it is it's a legal pathway that we can take people from other countries and bring them up here temporarily to try to fill our work needs in Colorado. Um, the reason why we're so supportive is that these people come in, they do very good work for us. They're not competing against American jobs because we have this gap in trying to fill that, as many people out there are probably experiencing in Colorado and elsewhere. And they pay taxes, Social Security. They don't usually even receive the benefits of those programs. And then they go back home because they want to try to help their family and kids. So they have to leave every year. And then there's a vetting process. Um, it's a program that, like I said, Colorado is the highest per capita user of this program and very important to all of us. And even when people don't have H2B workers to say, oh, it doesn't affect us. Well, it does, because that means if a larger company isn't getting their H2B workers, that means they're going to be after workers that you're going after. So it's important that we try to find as much workers as we can. Interesting enough, similar to hospitality and tourism, We also do a lot of programs to try to bring younger people into the industry. We have pathway programs that we work with. We work with a lot of high schools out there because a lot of them have landscape programs where they're trying to give some job ready skills. So we provide them education. We have things like ProGreen coming up here that we'll get into later. And we'll actually bring hundreds of kids into the ProGreen Expo so they get a taste of the landscape industry, and a lot of them become future workers that we depend on. But kind of going back to how I back at ALCC, that's where I first understand, oh, there's another statewide organization, kind of, even though it was a national organization. But interesting enough, ALCC was doing a national search, and I was thinking about a change from the ski industry, and a company out of Washington, a recruiter that ALCC had retained during one of their leadership changes, reached out to me and started asking to see if I'd be interested. I really became more interested in it when I started to understand the mission of ALCC and what it is out to attempt, and what good work they've been doing in Colorado at large. And so that really piqued my interest. I think there's a lot of things that when you're in something as large as tourism in Colorado, that there's doors that you can make available for other organizations like, the Associated Landscape Contractors of Colorado. So it's been interesting. I've been bridging a lot of the things with the National Ski Areas Association and the leverage that I had there. And it's been helping, all of our businesses in Colorado as a result of it. So I've been there since 2017. It's amazing. What's interesting about ALCC, it's over 60-year-old organization. It has over 400 companies statewide, large, small, medium, that are all members. Each of those members have a different purpose or focus being involved with ALCC. For example, a larger company, they'll use our training, but they also really heavily depend, because they understand our advocacy work. Because if things don't go well with, pesticide legislation, and I can touch on that a little bit later, or even with backflows that we had to roll back, and ALCC was really the organization to help push the, turning back the backflow legislation that was stuck in there. They understood that the legislation thing was absolutely critical. Medium-sized company will look at advocacy, and they'll also look at education, because there are things in the marketplace as there's more consolidation. They're like, well, wait a minute, what can we do to be competitive? And then there are the smaller companies that are like, hey, we really need like networking opportunity, and we need to understand what other businesses are doing well. And that's kind of one of the things that brought me to the landscape industry, was the camaraderie that I see. It's an industry where everybody wants to help each other, and we have a lot of mentorship. ALCC, when people tap into the organization, it gives them access, and it gives them opportunity for not only some of the education that we provide, but it also gives them one-on-one opportunity, whether it be a board member, a large company, you name it. Our people are willing to help other companies to try to help the level of professionalism, help them some problem solving, whether it be business skills or just, ways that they deal with, labor issues, or, how they're trying to navigate the regulation that gets increasingly more stringent in Colorado.
That is one of the things I have really appreciated about my time with the ALCC. And it was actually kind of a shock to me when I left landscaping and went into this business education, rural economic development space that I'm in now, where I was so accustomed to landscaping and seasonal industries, where you do see that collaboration and everybody's like, oh, this client doesn't quite match what I'm doing, but you're really great for this company over here. Or I called Ann Campbell earlier this year when you invited me to be on the board of ALCC, and I called Ann Campbell and I said, hey, you're the outgoing president of the board. Can you answer some questions for me about what that's like, and what it's like being in a different place? And she was like, of course, obviously, clearly I will help you out. And so there is very much that sense of working together. And then when I left for business education, it's just not the same as much, because there is a little bit more competition. It is a little bit more kind of that consulting piece where you don't see quite as much we're all in this together sort of piece. Um, but also there's not really the same sort of um, industry-wide group that you go and you really build those connections with in the same way. Um, which kind of brings me to my first question for you, which is why do industry groups still matter? Why are they still relevant? We kind of see this increasing like, oh, in the digital age, I don't need to go to in-person events or I don't need to join this industry group because I can get that information elsewhere. But I think they're still relevant. And I think you agree. So let's talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, no, I mean, you know, I've been in this business in the private industry for quite a while and was part of the many national and state associations. I think it's increasingly important because it's more important now to have that voice and that connection because competition is so fierce, whether it be against your other landscape companies to find that inside knowledge that you can get through an association. The advocacy part is critical. You know, a lot of people don't realize how important that advocacy part is. And so let's go back to the pandemic. And, you know, when people were shut down, and the reason why they were able to go forward is because you had a state association like ALCC that was at the forefront that made it important and was able to work with the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment to put down landscape as essential workers, which allowed everybody. And that had tremendous impact throughout the state, you know, especially in the Western Slope. You know, I you know, take my hometown of Aspen, they were all over it. There were companies that weren't even members of ours that became members because they immediately recognized it's like, you're the ones that help us get our doors back open and reposition us. You know, there are other companies that didn't quite understand it as well. And then we start getting into pesticides, and it's like, well, you know, we'll take care of it. And it's like, hey, look, we're all in favor for responsible use of pesticides, you know, follow the science. But at the same time, if you didn't have an organization, ALCC, imagine if every single city had different pesticide requirements and what that would mean to you all, you know, in terms of trying to prepare your trucks, your crews for all those different regulations. It'd be impossible to keep up with it. And so those are
It
the
is a
things
struggle for
that,
sure. And
yeah.
taxes are often like that already. And the amount of time spent just paying individual city taxes is
Oh, yeah.
brutal for
Well,
some
and we're on the
landscaping industries.
simplified tax coalition. And, you know, I think what's important also for people to know is, you know, ALCC is the largest part of the green industry. And then we work with our partners like, you know, Nursery and Gardens and, you know, CNGA, for example. And as a coalition, we're GreenCo, which is 7 trade organizations. I mean, it's everything from sod growers to architects, you name it. And while we're the lead of it, you know, we have strength in the green industry because you have leaders like ALCC that are pushing this ongoing. In fact, we're just getting into the legislative year and we're already trying to roll back, you know, let's take suppliers. And there was a bill out 23, what is it, 1161, and it focused on controllers and check valves. And, you know, what's happening in Colorado that people also need to understand is, and I say this coming from, you know, having a strong position in California government, you know, we're trying to not only keep up with California regulation, we're actually trying to do things that even California is not accepting. So that shows you how driven we are in Colorado to try to be first. And sometimes we do this ready, fire, aim strategy in Colorado, like, you know, let's not look at the wisdom of other states rejecting it or different modifications. Let's just go forward on this legislation. A lot of things get stuck in, and sometimes it goes below the radar where nobody even sees it, you know. And so you know, we had a couple of things like backflows that people are probably familiar with. And on the backflow issue, you know, they stuck under a bill last minute, and we immediately went into action to repeal it. And so, you know, repealing, you know, and bringing back, dialing back the backflow issues so landscape companies can continue to operate doing that. You know, that's something that impacted everybody immediately. So it's becoming more and more regulation. In the Front Range, you know, there's zero emission equipment, lawn equipment, you know, within the regional air quality control, non-attainment area, they call it. And again, hey, we're all about clean energy. as long as it's thoughtful, as long as it doesn't put the financial burden on our companies. And, after the pandemic, a lot of our companies went into capital mode. They brought in new equipment, and a lot of it was gas powered. And all of a sudden, they're trying to roll out the regulation that's asking for immediate conversion to this. And we're like, oh, wait, stop. We need to do this thoughtfully. We'll support you. We're doing education around it. We're even, a program going to have equipment, electrification, lawn equipment, rodeos, and there'll be a lot of people trying to understand it. But let's push this out to 2031, before we have to kind of go into commercial. They did it was in state, but again, that's because of the importance of a trade organization doing that for them. There's things that are coming up here that are going to make it even more important. So we continue to work on workforce issues, and it's an interesting administration right now, only because of some of the dynamics. I mean, and going back to H2B, we fight that every year. It's like hitting your head against the wall, but if you don't, then things could be worse. So let's take, for example, what's happening right now. You're supposed to get 66,000 H2B visas, because we have the ability to go beyond the supplemental piece. And right now they're resisting allowing all of those visas out. And we're in a world right now that there's another visa called J1s, which is more common with ski areas. It's also looking for overseas workers, and the government has cut back the J1 program significantly, which means the ski areas are now looking to try to get more H2B visas, which has an immediate impact on the entire state when it comes to our into our services and what we do for landscape. So those are some of the things that are happening. But beyond just workforce, it's this level of professionalism. And that's some of the pieces that actually started the ALCC. Before there was legislation, there was a need 60 years ago to say, hey, we need to raise a level of professionalism within our industry. And it's interesting because I still get those reports, and I'm getting them more now than I have been since before the pandemic. And there's a lot of great companies out there doing very good work and doing it right. But there's a lot of companies that aren't quite at those standards. And it's important that we all try to get those standards up, because the complaint that we get from some of our companies is that, I need to raise the level of professionalism in my area, because when I go into bid, the first thing I have to overcome is the work of another company that wasn't as professional as ours. And now I'm not just trying to sell the customer on our services. I'm trying to explain why they should trust us, because they had this other poor experience and they weren't using, the greatest skills, and they weren't using a program that's at the level that we would expect as professional landscapers. So that's why we have all these certification programs that are available.
Yeah, so you're launching a couple of new certification programs, which I think are really exciting. And so you've had the Sustainable Landscape Management Program for a long time, really thinking about how does sustainability impact overall landscaping choices? How do you educate your members and other interested parties about thinking long-term in terms of landscape development? And then now you're launching this Colorado Scapes program, which really focuses on how do we do that specifically well in Colorado? And I know Colorado Scapes, and I think the SLM program too, were both done in conjunction with CSU, and really being intentional of what is the best science, what are the needs of Colorado, and how can we educate both companies in this realm, but then also consumers of, hey, when you think about landscaping, this is why these certifications matter, because it is that level of professionalism. And one thing I say a lot when I'm teaching anybody who's in the skilled trades, I say, here's the thing. The level of professionalism in a lot of areas is pretty low. And so if you as a company call your clients back, you show up when you say you're going to show up, and you do the work you said you were going to do, like you're in the top tier of businesses, which is not a great bar to have, but is true in a lot of industries. So talk a little bit about how you work within those and that Colorado Scapes programming and the way that you do that type of teaching and certification?
Yeah, and I should probably go back just a little bit, why we even got into this piece. So many years ago, during one of our droughts, there was heavy pressure on the landscape industry that we were the villains of all the, water use and the perception because they see a broken, sprinkler head and it's irrigating a highway that, oh, that must be where all the water is going in these drought conditions. So there was a lot of work done earlier to try to educate, our legislators and the public as to, well, how much is water usage, even from landscape? And so we did a very extensive study. And in that study, that was collaboration with CSU. It showed that landscapes, are responsible for 3% of the water on a state basis. Obviously, there's regions where there's more landscape, but, obviously compared to agriculture, it's fairly small. That was really important first step because, before that happened, kind of the villainization of landscape made it very difficult to work with water providers and municipalities because they're always looking at like, okay, guys, you are the ones that are the culprits. So we not only educated them, but we brought them along to say, look, we're going to start to be not only educating you on this, we're going to be the solution here. And so that's when LCC, it happened right when I came here, that we said, we're going to be on the leading edge of trying to help the state with this water issue and do our part. So that's when we really focus on sustainability. And that's when we came up with the idea of SLM, Sustainable Landscape Management. And the reason we came up with SLM is like, look, we have a very robust thing that if people haven't heard of it, it's called BMPs, or Best Management Practices. It's one of the most in-depth documents out there that talks about landscape, not just in Colorado, but throughout the country. And what's interesting about some of the things that come out of Colorado and ALCC is a lot of our national certifications were actually born here through ALCC and through Colorado and CSU. So we're kind of the thought leaders for the country, which is interesting for a state of only 6 million people that all this would be coming out, that here we are. From that program, we said, okay, the BMPs are maybe too comprehensive for some people. Let's go after a market size. It's just, what's the lowest hanging fruit? Well, it's just the maintenance part of it. So we said, okay, let's come up with a program to give some fundamental information about sustainable landscape. And so that's when we came out back in, I guess, 2019, I want to think, of SLM. And in there, it's, less than 4 hours of training, gives a lot of great knowledge. It helps a tremendous amount of people. We have hundreds of people going through that program for that certification. But what's happened over the years is that we worked closer and closer with, things like WaterWise and municipalities and water utilities to say, look, I think the market's ready for a more comprehensive approach. About that time, what we also realized is that we used to have another certification program with our partners with NALP that showed hands-on proficiency. Well, NALP did away with that hands-on proficiency. So, where this is going is we had SLM. People said we need a more robust program. I think we're ready for a much more lengthy program. And I think we need to take a lot more BMP information, and we need to take the fact that, things are changing because we lost a hands-on proficiency. We need to bring all that back. And so that was the nexus where we are today and the exciting launch of Colorado Scapes certification. And that program, is going to be 35 hours altogether. It's going to be 20 hours online, which we're really excited about. Right now, we're doing it in English. Within 2 years, it'll be a Spanish version, which is very important for us. And it'll be just 15 hours of hands-on proficiency, which a lot of our companies, large and small, are all demanding and asking for. So that's super exciting. And it's all things, as you mentioned, as the thought leaders, CSU Extension and ALCC, people who put together these national programs are coming out with this. The Colorado Scapes is super interesting because one of the things we had discussions with with the water utilities in many of our meetings was, people are the, I'm talking about the customer and, regular consumer out there. They get very confused by, everything we talk about, water wise. Okay, well, how does that compare to xeriscaping? And how does that compare to this other program? And so what we start to do is really try to put a lot of focus behind Coloradoscape, something that is uniquely Colorado, and what, our plants here and how we reduce plant attrition. All that went into this new Coloradoscape certification. So it's really robust. It'll be coming out of Pro Green here in early February. And this is something that the water utilities, we already have strong support from, the largest ones out there. We have Denver Water, we have Northern Water, we have support from the Roaring Fork Valley and even Grand Junction got on board. And this affects the Western Slope. And so when this comes out, we'll have training areas, not only down in the Front Range in Denver, but we're looking to put a training area in the Glenwood or Grand Junction area. And we've already had some preliminary discussions of how we could do that. So these are going to be opportunities, but this is going to become the gold standard of what people are expect and what the customers are going to be looking for, because they're going to be seeing more and more Coloradoscape. In fact, we own the trademark for it at ALCC. And so, but we're very excited about this. Water utilities are, right with us on developing it. It's probably the most joined we've ever been with the water utilities. So it's really evolved from, earlier being the villain to now we're the solution. And not only to that, we have marketing channels through our partnership with Channel 9 and Channel 7 News here in Colorado that we're able to talk about the importance of all of this and to highlight Coloradoscape. So, it's something that if you're a business out there, is going to be important for you to be a part of and have some people go through that training and to be able to tout that, you're Coloradoscape certified. So exciting news. It's another chapter in ALCC's long history.
Yeah, yeah, I'm pretty excited about it, personally, as a person who lives on the western side of Colorado, and the way that we think about landscaping out here is very, very different than how you think about it in the Front Range or in the Denver metro area, just because we're not concentrated, right? We have small towns, people live outside of town. I have 18 acres and I don't have a lawn anywhere. I don't have landscaping necessarily. I'm thinking more about habitat restoration. What does my acreage look like in a way that makes sense for the environment that I'm in? And that's very different than how people think about it. If you're in an urban or a suburban area where you have, an eighth of an acre to half an acre, and you go, okay, great. How do I use this land for part of my life, as opposed to how am I managing this space in a way that makes sense for the ecology. So I'm pretty excited about it. And so you mentioned that it will be available in Spanish in 2 years. And I know that you do other educational programming in Spanish. You have the Latino committee. You have when you work with Outgrow Your Garage, we do courses for you in both English and Spanish. And so why does that matter for the landscaping industry to be bilingual to the greatest extent possible? Talk a little bit about why that matters.
Of course, it's critical. So much of our workforce, are Spanish speaking. It's important that they have a good understanding of what's available. And there's a couple, and it's not just the fact that we're giving training information in Spanish, whether it be Outgrow Your Garage or SLM or Coloradoscape, so they can understand it and be translated, because we do have that available for SLM, and there will be manuals in the future in Spanish. Going back to the Latino committee, the reason why the Latino committee even was evolved was to really better focus on our Spanish speaking workforce. And part of it was not only to help, those people have a network, an opportunity to exchange ideas and do seminars of, things that are really important to that, particular workforce segment. But, one of the things we found is we have a lot of Latino workers that, are kind of lower management, and these guys need to become supervisors. and what are the barriers for them to be supervisors? And there's a lot of cultural things within, that workforce segment that are unique to Latino workers that, that maybe other segments don't think about. There's a cultural thing, there's maybe, some barriers that they feel that prevent them to wanting to go to those supervisor positions. And so the Latino committee is all about addressing that and trying to give them tools like, hey, you're lower management, you should become a supervisor. And here's the things that you should look at. And here's how you can be a leader in there. And a lot of times, it's some could be language barriers and being comfortable. Sometimes it could be different family pressures, in kind of the way that they see their free time versus, what they have with their family and going up for those upper positions. So it's a good focus on that segment. And we look to only grow it because it's so critical to all of us.
Yeah, it is. And Outgrow Your Garage is bilingual for a lot of those same reasons. We see small business increasingly has always been in America, but also is increasingly, that is a great tool for economic growth. It is a great way to increase class mobility in a given area. It is a great way to allow people to change the circumstances of their life and of their communities, which, as you know, is Outgrow Your Garage's mission all the time. And so in landscaping, like in a lot of other industries, we've seen this weird consolidation where you have these small businesses and then your medium businesses are consolidating into these larger businesses. And we have this kind of gap in the middle. So how are you handling that as an industry? And how has that impacted your membership and programming?
Yeah, it's been an interesting dynamic. And, it's interesting because my background's all about consolidation, these large mergers. I mean, being part of the Vail acquisitions and all that. And of course, all that happened years ago. So to see it now in the landscape is very similar. And what gets lost sometimes in these mergers, if you're somebody from a different market and you're the owner of the company of the large companies, you may not see what's unique to Colorado. And therefore you kind of meet the little pieces that are really important in training that would be different than being back in Illinois or California or other areas. So it's really important for those larger companies to maintain it. It's interesting with membership because obviously if you take 5 companies, you turn them into one, it gives us a whole different type of pricing structure. Suddenly, we have new limits. We have different rates for different size companies, and so suddenly you're into like a whole nother tier structure because now these companies are much larger than they were before. And with the medium-sized companies, what we're finding is like more of the need is like, hey, we for those that are looking to sell their companies, like what can we do to try to elevate the worth of our company? We need to have the latest on certification. There's others that are like have no plans for acquisition. They want to, grow their own company. And so they're like, what tools can we be not in preparation for a sale, and cash out? What can we do to try to grow as a company and take advantage of this? Because what happens when you have large companies, there are sometimes these gaps that they have that they miss just because of the financial planning that they have for their company and the acquisition. And and with private equity, if people are involved with it, it's a different way of looking at your financials. And there's a different expectation for return on investment, which may not be there as much for somebody that owns their own business. And so, those guys are challenged, and we've seen some large companies that gone through private equity and they've really kind of struggled. And I won't go into any particulars, but there's probably people with some of the stories out there. And so then, and I went through this in my previous career where, sometimes a large company can leave an enormous gap because they're getting directives outside the market. They suddenly weaken themselves because the little nuances that some of these companies have had in relationships may not be as that's a better way of like maybe not handled in the same way, maybe a little bit more rigid. and they lose these contracts that they've had for years. And then that leaves opportunity for the middle ones. I think for the smaller companies with the consolidation, they have to work harder to compete and get in there. So, that's kind of where all this shift is. And having gone through many acquisitions in my prior life before, it's kind of interesting because we left market share on the table left and right, and Vail would do that. We lost things in the UK, and you try to explain it to our investors, and it's like, hey, you're probably not thinking the long-term implication, but if we don't continue this, your ROI isn't probably looking the way it will if we lose the market. You're only thinking about what the market growth potential is. And I can say firsthand, we lost market share in certain markets that we should never lost, but it's just because of the investor pressure that we had. And of course, our competitors were savvy and they jumped right in and took over the programs that we owned. And so, and I even had that here in the Denver market through consolidation. I had some large programs with, whether it be the Denver Broncos or Avalanche, and they couldn't understand why we had those programs, but they understood the minute that they dissolved them, because right in was our competitors, and all of a sudden it's like, why their market share grow? I said, because you didn't have the wisdom to see how this panned out long term, because everything's on a quarterly basis. So, those are some of the things that I've experienced, and I know that are happening right now in some cases. So, there is market opportunity, but you need to be a company really has their duck in a row, that if you're going to try to compete against the larger ones, you need to be able to show what kind of skill set you have. You need to show what kind of certifications back up your claims, that you're every bit as professional as that company was or is. And then the smaller ones, it's so easy to be left behind as a smaller company, and it's sometimes harder because they may not have the resources other companies try to put into education, but they have to find a way to prioritize it. They need to be part of the community if they want to see real significant growth, because things change every year and things are accelerating within this industry. And I can tell you, being in part of other industries that have gone through this, if you don't keep up, you get left behind. And if you sit on your laurels, it's a tough road. You're losing opportunity to grow.
Yeah, and there are pros and cons to being a small business. I've been a small business owner for a very long time now, and on one hand, I never have to answer to an investor, and that is delightful for me. I have complete control over what I get to decide, but also sometimes I don't have the money for the things that I would really like to be able to do for my staff or for my team or for my business. And so balancing that and figuring out how to stay in business is sometimes a pretty big adventure. So we are just about out of time here. Tell us how to find ALCC and when ProGreen is, and how to sign up for that for anybody who's interested in landscaping industry conferences.
Yeah, I would say jump on immediately at alcc.com to find out more information. You'll find everything from Colorado Scaping to SLM to other certifications. You'll find out more about our advocacy efforts and what we're working on right now. Allows you to be able to sign up for information. So that was a great resource. And that would be step number one. Go there, reach out to our membership director, Tammy DeFalco, if you'd like to get some specific information. We are running 20% off right now. So if you call the office, they can give you more information. And ProGreen. And if you haven't been to ProGreen, it's this region's largest trade show. ALCC is the primary owner of that show. We do have with a couple of our other associated businesses, but it's primarily for landscape. If you've been to NALP, it's a pretty sizable exhibit, pretty much the same size of NALP, but it's right here in Colorado. There'll be well over 100 different classes available. A lot of them are specific to landscape. There's also nurseries and greenhouses. That date's going to be the 3rd through the 5th of February. So it's coming up here quick, guys. So I would probably jump on it. But, the first step I would do is call, the ALCC and understand about membership, because if you have a membership with ALCC, not only can you receive 20% off your membership right now, but you'll get a significant discount over at Program. So it all pans out into paying for itself in some cases. So, and it's a great time to learn more about coralscaping because it'll be statewide. It'll be something that will be, something you can't avoid in the years to come. So now would be a good time to jump on it.
Yeah. And if you are a person who is not involved in the landscaping industry watching this, but you're thinking about hiring a landscaper, I believe ALCC also has a find a landscaping professional section of their website. So check that out if you would like professional landscapers.
Yes, absolutely. And yeah, I would say go to that resource. It will give you a sense of what landscape companies are out there, and a lot of competition. Get out there quick.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you very much for coming to our very first edition of What's Going On With. Next week, we are talking to Lauren Jenkins, founder of Mini Money. He does wealth management and financial literacy for kids and youth. And so if you are interested in how to teach teenagers, particularly ones from left behind, disenchanted, underrepresented communities, Lauren does some really cool programmings on money management. And so that's what's happening next week, right here at 10 a.m. on Wednesdays. And we'll see
Absolutely. Well, thank you
y'all
for having
next
me, Jesse.
week. Yeah.